Hajime! Welcome back to Comic-Jutsu. JT McRoberts here with you once again, and today I'm excited to bring you a special Comic Book Dojo episode wherein we take a look at the fighting style of the one, the only Bruce Lee. No, actually, it's the one, the only Kato. Though Kato as portrayed by Bruce Lee in the television series from 1966, which was based on the original iteration of a radio program of the Green Hornet from 1936. Created by some dude named George W. Trindle and Fran Stryker. Never heard of him before this or after, though apparently George W. Trindle was also responsible for helping create the Lone Ranger, which as an interesting little side note, the Green Hornet is supposed to be the Lone Ranger's nephew. And speaking of nephews, the Kato in this particular series, this comic series presented by Now Comics, this was released in 1992. This Kato is considered the son of the original Kato from the radio series, though by now he'd be even too old for that. We might be on to the grandson, but we'll see. And he is named Hayashi Kato. I'm just mixing all the names up tonight. Hayashi Kato, with the name Hayashi being a tribute to the original radio actor that played Kato on that good old Green Hornet show. But that brings us up to 1992. Bruce Lee Mania has kind of died out by this point. If you don't know what Bruce Lee Mania is, I'll show you a little bit. So I guess actually it was still in full effect until the rise of the UFC and mixed martial arts as we know it. Writing about Bruce Lee is a bit of a cottage industry all unto itself. A lot of that has moved, that discussion has moved online now. And one of the few topics more incendiary than the Stan Lee versus Jack Kirby topic is Bruce Lee and Jeet Kune. Because, man, if you talk about it anywhere online, even in fighting or Jeet Kune forums, people will come out of the wet works. They'll come out of the woodworks, rather. They come out ready for some wet works, is what they do. But they will come out and argue with you to the death. And it's not pretty. But anyway, Bruce Lee portrayed Kato on that TV series. You can see the ill-fated crossover with the Batman TV series where Bruce Lee has to square off against the Boy Wonder, Robin, portrayed by Burt Ward, in what is a really comical sequence. But there it is. If you love to see Bruce Lee in action, you've got to at least see that at some point. But the fun thing about the Bruce Lee performance as Kato was that he did mix a lot of his Jeet Kune into his performances, but it was, shall we say, considerably more, screen ready, screen pleasant than actual Jeet Kune, which is more direct and economic. It still had elements of flash to it, but the techniques were always portrayed to be very, very quick and very effective. Written by Mike Barron, who we know has a karate background and has studied some other things. I think it's one of those like tiger karate styles. I'm not sure. All apologies to Mr. Barron. I should have looked it up before we started this video. But then drawn by Brent Anderson, who I believe is of that Continuity Comics school. So he's using that kind of Neil Adams photorealistic action style combo of Jack Kirby and whoever else Neil Adams combined his work to be. Now, this is going to be an interesting breakdown because it's going to be a lot heavier on the actual real-world techniques than what we might normally see in, like, a Marvel comic book, for example. Like, even a heavy martial arts comic book like Captain America, which has a lot of boxing, or judo, or even one of the iterations of Shang-Chi or the Iron Fist. Because the reason I say it's heavier, even though you might see like training sequences and plenty of fight scenes in Iron Fist or something like Master of Kung Fu with Shang-Chi, it's old habits die hard. Sorry, you do see like what is almost literal, real world technique here on display. It opens right up with Kato working on his wooden man. Here you can see Bruce actually working with his wooden man. This was when he was still holding on to his traditional Gung Fu days. He's got the traditional Gung Fu robe on there before he completely broke away and became more iconoclastic with his Jeet Kune style. That is in the Tao of Gung Fu. I do recommend that if you want to understand Bruce's approach to Gung Fu, or Kung Fu as you might know it. Starts with a low kick entry, finger jab to the eyes, separating the arms, Pak Sao with the strike to the body. This Pak Sao is what that's known as. And then I suppose this is another finishing up some kind of finger jab, or he's just wrapping up around the arm. But anyway, so Kato, he's working out, gets a message. Come back to China. The Shaolin Temple is in danger. As you can see, the artwork is really solid here. There's a big problem with the coloring, though. It's like way too dark. We'll see how it shows up on screen, but in the actual book itself, there are a lot of really murky sequences. This seems to be a real problem for any kind of continuity works or offshoots of continuity. I mean, I wonder if this was, farmed out to continuity studios from now, or if they just nabbed Brent Anderson somehow and said, hey, come make this comic book. But the coloring is a bit of a mess. I really enjoy this series, though. I mean, if you're any kind of old school fan of Bruce Lee's Kung Fu films, Way of the Dragon, Chinese Connection, The Big Boss, Enter the Dragon, this series plays a lot like one of those films. It's almost like an unspoken sequel to Enter the Dragon, if that would be called Return of the Dragon, but there was already a Return of the Dragon. The original title was Way of the Dragon, not to confuse people out there, but that's the way movies were released back then. They would just slap titles on films to try to update them when they were released. Here you can see that problem with the coloring, how there's just too much black on the page, and everything is really murky. Though I will say that the page coloring itself, it's only a little bit off-white. I mean, it looks pretty good to be, now approaching 30 years. Now, here we go. Nunchaku. This is a nice, flashy weapon to use. One of the reasons I point out techniques in these books are for people that are not sure about how to put together a fight scene. So that's why I try to make note of the things that look good and balance it out versus with reality versus fantasy and that sort of thing. And then, of course, it all has to be dynamic and clear and understandable when presented in sequential illustration form, or the comic book, as we like to call it. Though this is a scene straight out of several of Bruce's movies. I mean, he uses nunchaku like this, and he always gives it a nice little flashy spin. You can see here he's taking on multiple opponents. Good stuff. Trying to hold them at bay just by being flashy. Makes the first move at this guy who's the closest. Wraps up his weapon, then attacks the other guy nearest to him with his other set of nunchaku. And then follows up on the first guy who he's disarmed. So this is a nice bit of real world combat technique right in there. Pop, pop. I mean, both of those guys got clocked pretty hard. If you're taking a nunchaku strike to the temple, that's a fight ender. I mean, that's not something you get up from easily. Follows up with a round kick to this dude. So this guy gets totally eliminated. He even gets kicked out of his flip-flops there. That's a nice little touch by Brent Anderson. But the absolute just murkiness of the colors is a mess here. It really is. I'm no expert on color, but even I can tell that this is too dark. This is a nice use of range here. So there's another combatant coming up. So he throws a set of nunchaku at him to distract him. uses that distracting to close the gap. Boom, hits him in the groin with this stick. It looks like a rattan stick, but it's drawn like a piece of rebar almost. But the coloring makes it appear to be just a stick. The guy's coming with a knife up from behind him. Always remember that in combats with multiple opponents, there's always somebody coming up behind you. Kato's guide interferes, whacks this guy. Kato follows up with a nunchaku strike to knock him out. Strike to the temple. Classic weak point. This is all good stuff. I mean, there's nothing too overly drafted here. There's just enough to tell what this is. Train station, city of Hong Kong, I guess they're in here. And this is kind of that sexy spy thriller moment here where they've got the female principal and she says, "Don't look while I change my clothes." And he says, "Oh, don't worry, I won't." And a little bit of a titillating sequence there where he sees a little bit of the reflection of her getting undressed. So he's technically not looking, but he is looking. So I imagine he put it down like right away, right? Because we want our hero to be a good guy. We don't want him to be, some kind of creepy perv. But anyway, be interesting to see who wrote that in. One thing to note about the flow of events in this and the compositions and whatnot is that Mike Baron usually provides small thumbnails of everything. So he's really thumbnailing out this action and making sure that it's clear to Brent Anderson, who comes in and renders the final version. Here we see another gang confrontation for Kato. Starts out with the classic Bruce Lee flying Kizik. Enters with some trapping. We didn't get too much into trapping. We haven't talked about that too much. It's considered an infighting technique when you're in close. Using short punches, elbow strikes, attacks to the face and the groin. Here we see Kato transitioning into an arm lock. Very nice there. Just a straight arm bar, standing. Uses his knee to balance it out a little bit. Has a lot of leverage on that. So again, you're seeing a lot of, this is real world technique. There are a lot of things that happen on the inside here in this trapping. Hitting the face multiple times, hitting down low, moving the arm out of the way, that sort of thing. And there are only so many ways that can actually be represented on the page. So they're using a bit of those after images, the DeLuca effect, if you will, to show there's so much happening just in this one sequence. Otherwise, I mean, what would you do? It would be just a series of staccato panels showing all of that. Again, just suggestions for how to improve your action, how to beef it up, how to give it meaning, and with a little bit of reality injected right into it. So again, continuing our story here, they've got to take the boat out to the temple. This is pretty much just following the template set up by Enter the Dragon. It really is. Flipped over a nice little Married with Children ad there. I wonder who that was on the art. There's really good caricatures there. And you can see the ad for the Green Hornet, the in-house ad from Now Comics. It's not spectacular. I mean, it's solid art. You can tell what it is. You can tell what they're doing. But there's no sexiness to it, so it's a little bit bland at this time. These guys are releasing this stuff just prior to the great glut and the fall of the comics industries there in the 90s. Just like in Enter the Dragon, he has a little sequence where instead of being challenged, he has someone ask for kung fu lessons. So he says, "Okay, well, just hit me," and he just moves his head out of the way. And we have a little quote down here. "You're too rigid, turn into a doll of straw. It has no ego, it thinks of nothing. Let the body and limbs work themselves out in accordance with the discipline they have undergone." So I imagine, and that's actually kind of familiar. I think that's right out of the Tao of Jeet Kune, written by Bruce Lee, which I haven't mentioned much here, but there was a series edited by John Little where he basically took the Tao of Jeet Kune and kind of reorganized it and better cataloged it. So if you're curious about the Tao of Jeet Kune, or if you're serious about doing like actual training and learning about the tools and techniques of Bruce Lee, I'd recommend the John Little series. But in my opinion, I mean, every martial artist should read the Tao Jeet Kune Do. Even though it's not properly organized, it's like having a stack of Bruce Lee's notes there. Notes about his training, notes about his philosophy. And he would have little things written like that in there and attach it to some sort of fighting sequence. And it would basically show how the philosophy relates to that particular strategy or technique. Pretty cool stuff. Okay, so a little bit of the B subplot going on there with the romance. They have to take a smaller skiff to the island. Skiff, excuse me, without the T. It's smashed upon the rocks. Kato helps his buddy. They have some strange names here for these Chinese guys. His friend is Ulysses. The one they're meeting is named Tiberius. So I don't know. Mike Barron was not digging deep for Chinese names for this particular series. So they eventually have to catch a ride with some fishermen. And of course, as in any good kung fu movie, there's gambling going on. He wants to, he makes a bet that this guy won't be able to move him. He's just using like an old kung fu trick or whatever. It's like something you'd see the Tai Chi masters doing. So they get mad. They all try to jump him all at once. Again, this is self-defense 101. You see this technique in a whole lot of disciplines, whether it's Aikido, Karate, Kung Fu. These wrist locks, this is straight out of Aikido. And also, you can find them in Kali and Chin Na. There's wrist locks in Hapkido. A lot of similarities between or across an array of arts. But again, so you're seeing an almost step-by-step sequence of everything he's doing here. Grabbing the hand to hold to free the neck, protect the neck. Dropping his weight down to pull him forward. Pops his head out the back. Begins controlling the wrist, or continues controlling the wrist, which he began up here. And then boom, twists it into a wrist lock, and then throws him right off the back of the truck. Frees the bird, opens the cage, lets it fly away. This guy was saying he was going to, this other guy says he was going to hire a whore, or a lady of the night, if you will, and bite the bird's head off. And Kato wanted it to be free. So there you go. He has a little save the cat moment. For those of you looking for writing tips. And here you go. They continue their way towards the Shaolin Temple. But they run into the Red Army. Too late for you, spies. Dun-dun. Great artwork from Brent Anderson through this. I mean, it's solid all the way through. It's easy to read. Not confusing at all. It's marred by the coloring, which is a shame because that's just not his fault. Even this pinup is too dark. I guess there was a lot of experimentation going on there at the time. They were just rolling forward. Having some technical difficulties, unfortunately. Okay, now if you stuck around this long, I'm going to give you a couple quick books that you might want to check out. Okay, so if you're curious about the Wing Chun thing, I recommend Wing Chun Kung Fu by Jimmy Lee, okay? Because it was technically edited by Bruce Lee. So think of this as essentially Bruce's thesis on his original style of Wing Chun. Though technically he did learn Tai Chi with his father, because a lot of the elderly members of families would do Tai Chi all throughout Hong Kong. He did Tai Chi before he started studying Kung Fu with Ip Man, which is when he learned Wing Chun, had a series of street fights and whatnot, which lead us to the next one. So if you want to know about the practicality of Bruce Lee's technique, so at this point, he had adapted his Kung Fu and mix of boxing and whatever smattering of Kung Fu techniques he could come up with, plus the bits of wrestling that he was starting to learn and encounter, wrestling, judo, jiu-jitsu. And he adapts it, distills it down into actual self-defense. So this is a really solid book where if you need ideas of attacks and then you want to see a defense against it, this is simple bear hug from behind, grab the groin. His headlock from the front, punch the groin. This is stuff you do not see in the UFC, and you do not see it in the modern mixed martial arts era. Number one, because punching the groin is illegal. Though if you go all the way back to UFC number 3, you will see punching to the groin. No, it was UFC number 4. You will see punching to the groin like this. And also Dan Severn punched Ken Shamrock in the groin. Anyway, Ken Shamrock, world's most dangerous man. Here you go. Even defense against staff. So he keeps his range. Waits for the swing to go by. Follows up with a hook kick to the head. So it just gives you various ideas for attacks and actual real simple counters. So those are my recommendations. If you want to get really esoteric, you can look into something like Larry Hartzel's Entering to Trapping to Grappling, because it moves on to more wrestling elements. Here you can see shelving the leg, dumping his opponent over, then applying an immobilization, a pain lock, so on and so forth. Mix of trapping in here. Called it trappling, which is trapping to grappling. Anyway, grab the guy in a front headlock, or a guillotine as they are more commonly referred to nowadays. And there you go. It's fun stuff. Like I said, if you're a fan of Bruce Lee and those old school Bruce Lee movies, Way of the Dragon, Enter the Dragon, Game of Death, definitely give this series a try. It's a lot of fun. And if you are an artist or a writer wondering about how to make your fight scenes more exciting, or you're writing about a martial artist and you want to inject some verisimilitude into it, check out some of the stuff that I have mentioned, and you can start to get some good ideas. Anyway, there you go. Kato, Bruce Lee, Green Hornet, JT McRoberts, Comic-Jutsu. Like, subscribe. See you next time. Mate!